Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine waking up tomorrow to a completely impossible reality. Every major rival power has weakened. Every global balance has just collapsed. And overnight, one nation in the heart of Europe, Germany, is the undisputed, uncontested center of the world. Today, in this explainer, we're mapping out exactly what happens if Germany suddenly became the world's only superpower.
So, what if Germany woke up as the sole superpower? Honestly, the very first global reaction wouldn't be acceptance, it would be absolute disbelief. We are talking about a gradual, centuries-long historical shift here. We're looking at a sudden lock-in. Imagine a scenario where the rest of the world barely even has time to react before this completely new reality is set in stone.
Because suddenly, the entire world revolves around Berlin. And I really want to emphasize the sheer scale of this transformation. Global trade routes, they'd be entirely redesigned to align with German logistics. International agreements would be written strictly with German approval in mind. Even global tech standards would instantly align with whatever German firms and laboratories dictate. The reach of this influence is almost hard to comprehend. In this new reality, other nations would frantically scramble for strategic adaptation. They'd face an immediate, massive choice. Do you align closely with Berlin, hoping to secure favorable trade and protection, or do you attempt to preserve whatever autonomy you possibly can in a completely German-dominated world?
So let's look at part 1, a sudden new world order.
And that leads directly into part 2, the global economic engine. In this scenario, Germany wouldn't just be a large economy. It would become a massively integrated economic powerhouse built on real, tangible production, exports, and absolute engineering excellence. German industrial dominance would instantly sweep across multiple sectors: automation, aerospace, climate engineering, robotics, medical technology, defense, AI. The scope of industries they would suddenly control is staggering. Countries all across Asia, Africa, the Americas, and the Middle East would become incredibly dependent on German equipment and logistics just to keep their own basic infrastructure running.
Financially speaking, the euro, or whatever German-led monetary framework takes its place, basically becomes the ultimate anchor. It single-handedly stabilizes global stock, bond, and insurance markets. Global central banks would instantly have to coordinate around German policy, and international credit flows would purely reflect confidence in the German economic order. German institutional stability becomes the absolute baseline for global market confidence.
But here is the thematic paradox we really have to consider: global stability versus single-point fragility. On one hand, tying global prosperity to one highly efficient nation drastically reduces volatility. It makes things predictable. But on the other hand, if the world's financial stability rests on just this one pillar, well, a single crack in the German financial system could literally shake the entire planetary structure.
Which brings us to part 3, security and global dependency.
If Germany is the only superpower, it possesses the most advanced, seamless defense network on Earth, combining land, air, cyber, naval, and space capabilities. But their military doctrine wouldn't be about brute force or conquest. It would be hyper-focused on efficiency and deterrence, literally preventing wars before they even begin. And that brings up a really critical diplomatic difference: rule versus stewardship. A ruler demands obedience, but a steward earns trust. As the world's most sought-after mediator for global conflicts, Germany would face a tough choice. If it acts with restraint and fairness, it builds a rules-based order built on trust. If it acts only in its own interest, dictating terms, it risks massive global resentment.
But there's a hidden danger here, right? This overwhelming peace basically turns the world into a dependency machine. If Berlin is always there to hold the line and deter threats, other nations might just stop investing in their own defense, their own industrial base, and their own strategic autonomy. The world becomes incredibly peaceful on the surface, but terrifyingly fragile underneath.
Moving on to part 4, the culture of efficiency.
The ripple effects of this scenario go way beyond just economics and militaries. The German language, its universities, its architecture, and its urban planning would suddenly become the absolute gold standard that the rest of the entire world studies and imitates. German efficiency. It's no longer just a cliché, but the literal operating principle of the world system. Global aspirations would fundamentally change. Other countries would be desperately trying to copy German productivity, their bureaucracy, their infrastructure, and their industrial discipline. It essentially becomes the ultimate blueprint for civilizational success.
But that exact blueprint brings us to the conflict of order versus pluralism. There would be a very real global fear of soft imperialism. The worry is that diversity of thought, local culture, and political independence might be slowly squeezed out by one giant, standardized, incredibly efficient model of governance. The world might easily accept German influence, but for sure, they would deeply fear German control.
Yet, there is an incredibly optimistic side to this, a civilizational mission. Under massive coordinated German investment, we could see a planetary-scale clean energy transition, resilient low-carbon supply chains, and rapid breakthroughs in genetics, medical science, and sustainable urban development. This is absolutely the best-case scenario, provided, of course, that Germany treats this scientific knowledge as a global good to be shared with everyone, rather than a strategic asset to be monopolized.
And that leads us to Part 5, the burden of supremacy.
So, we've talked extensively about global systems, but let's pivot for a second to human psychology. What would everyday life actually look like inside Germany, knowing that the entire world is relying on your domestic policies? You are essentially living in the cockpit of civilization. The immense pressure on the German public would be staggering. Imagine knowing that a simple local labor policy passed in Munich or a new digital regulation debated in Hamburg directly and immediately impacts factories in East Africa and data markets globally. You are no longer just a citizen of a country, you are literally carrying a planetary responsibility.
And with that comes a massive moral burden, an emotional tax of supremacy. Every humanitarian crisis, every famine, every environmental disaster becomes a direct test of German leadership. You can't hide behind a coalition of other nations anymore. If the world improves, you're praised, sure. But if the world suffers, you take all the blame.
Globally, we'd witness a psychological shift in humanity itself. A younger generation would grow up viewing a unipolar, German-led world as entirely natural. They wouldn't even remember a messy time of competing global blocs. Global ambition would completely change, as children everywhere would grow up dreaming of one day joining German-led institutions and working within this hyper-efficient, centralized system.
So the really crucial point is this: Germany would become the pillar holding up the roof of civilization. To summarize this explainer, we are looking at the ultimate duality. On one side, you have the remarkable precision, coordination, and immense possibility of a highly ordered world, but on the exact opposite side, you have the terrifying fragility of extreme global dependence, where every mistake made by one single nation matters to absolutely everyone.
Which leaves us with this incredibly provocative question to close on today. Would you actually prefer a stable giant or a messy, multipolar balance? Is perfect order, efficiency, and scientific progress worth the potential cost of freedom, pluralism, and local autonomy? Take a moment to really think about that, because in a deeply interconnected world, there are absolutely no simple answers. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.